Lim will be joining us here, who is a very nice man. And while no one's perfect, he is a Michigan man. So outside of that, we love the fact that he comes in once a week and talks about the news of the day. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning. That's the one reason you would pick why I'm not perfect.
He gets that.
That's
Says it all the time.
Thank you.
Otherwise I'd say you're perfect. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, there you go.
I can deal with that.
Let's talk about this study. Getting a lot of attention. CTE, a new study came out that would really scare anybody who's ever played football, whether Pop Warner, high school, college, or professional. This is getting more and more of a reality in that brain injuries cause these diseases and these problems down the road.
Certainly, and the concept of CTE is really only about 5 years old. So in some ways, when you look at it from that standpoint, we've come a long way in understanding a disease process that was never defined before and adding a lot more clarity to it. The study that was published this week looked at autopsies of over 200 brains that were donated after athletes and mostly football players passed away. And from an NFL standpoint, the headline said, all but one of the former NFL athletes had evidence on the autopsy of CTE. And so it looks like that type of association is about as strong as you can get. It also showed in athletes who didn't rise up to the professional ranks, and stopped short, but still passed on and their bodies were donated, there was lesser evidence of CTE or sort of a graded response,
right.
Meaning that if you had to get up in the college ranks or in the professional ranks to really start seeing significant issues.
There were people there were high school kids who just played high school football, but there were fewer of those
right.
who were found to have it and more college kids and then the most professionals.
So the trouble now is to try to take that, which is extraordinary work. We're talking about 202 brain sections that were done, all autopsy, high-level work, but by definition, all way after the fact, right? Yeah. And now we have to try to make some assumptions and try to kind of correlate, well, how is their mood? Back when they were alive, did they show some of the neurologic signs of this disease? Were they depressed? Did they have rapid mood swings and that type of thing? And it seems like they did.
Right.
And it seems like those mood swings and those types of symptoms correlated with the autopsy results. And so everything seems to fall in line. So next step would be, well, football, maybe we need to change it, and this is done, right? Something seriously has to happen, and that's what's happened every time one of these studies have come out, and people start asking the question, well, if you had your son, would you let him play football,
right.
And all those kinds of things. I think even though we've learned a lot of things in 5 years, the cause and effect of really what causes these things is still highly speculative.
Yeah. Well, Kurt Warner, who will be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in the next couple of weeks, has said he doesn't want his kids playing football.
Well, it's a brutal game. Beyond, if we take the CTE or the brain damage part out of it,
right.
It's a brutal game without that. And everybody knows that.
Right.
And seeing former college football players, seeing former NFL football players walk around, and you can tell not just because of their size, but they limp badly.
Yeah.
And they have to have their knees replaced, their hips replaced, their back is never the same. This sport takes a significant toll out of these men, and that's not including the brain injuries.
But they know that going in. They know they might have bad knees, bad joints, bad ankles. No one told them, though, you might not be able to recognize your son, or you might be able to not still appreciate the love of your wife, because you talk to these women who say, the men used to be a fun-loving guy, now I don't even recognize the guy.
So I think that's one of the benefits of these studies over the past 5 years, and this is kind of, again, a rapid pace, but starting to be able to inform. And maybe the best possible things are a continuation of what started, whereas there's been a lot of looking at getting rid of head down, use the helmet as a weapon
right.
type of thing, trying to teach that right. in the younger ages. And although it's going to be 100 degrees outside again today, football season is right around the corner.
Right.
NFL training camps are starting. Kids are going to start hitting back on the field very, very soon. So doing it right and keeping the head out of it, and maybe changing the way the game is played.
Well, they have done quite a bit in terms of preseason and the contact and the contact during the week, and they have this concussion protocol. But ultimately, the players are getting heavier and heavier, and they're getting faster and faster.
Well, that's my concept with respect to, I think when you look at and you take the nugget out of this study, which says, wow, if you had to really play in college and pros. And so the folks who are in college who play big-time Division I football and definitely the folks that make the 53-man pro roster, these guys are big and they're fast. And it's hard to separate the two. Even the slowest guy on the team is pretty darn fast.
Right.
And so when they collide, this is a big collision. And when I speculate with respect to maybe we need to change the way the game's played, I really think we need to change the way the game's played. We cannot have 300-pound men pounding each other with 7-yard head starts and meeting head on, and still call that the way that it goes. And
it's also incumbent on the American people. At what point is this the gladiators? At one point is this the Roman Colosseum where you're feeding Christians to the lions?
Well, at this point, I would say there's so many similarities. This is the gladiators. The scary thing from this study is not the headline. The scary thing from this study is the fact that the average age of the bodies that were donated was in their 60s. The average age of how long we're supposed to live is about 78 or 79 years old. And so if you look at the lifespan of an NFL athlete, it's not as long as a regular a person who didn't play NFL.
I think another question is, how long does it take to develop something like this? Could it be one game, a year's of playing?
It's a great question. We don't know. And the corollary question to that in the thing that's been brought up is, and McGraw brought up the quote-unquote concussion protocol, which seems to be something that is mandatory to mention during anything.
Right.
They talk about the protocol now. Mm-hmm. That's after the fact, and that's too late. There's a lot of things that can happen, a lot of hits, a lot of trauma, and a lot of motion in the brain that can happen that doesn't cause a concussion. And so maybe there isn't one significant event. Maybe it's a recurrence of a lot smaller events that never register at a concussion level. We don't know, and we don't know how many repetitive times that has to happen and when those things start to look at. Because right now, we have what's called a pathologic diagnosis, which means you have to die, and we have to section your brain, and then we can see pathologic specimens that say, yep, this is CTE. That is the gold standard diagnosis.
Right.
So it's not really able to be used as Kelly have CTE. We can use some MRI correlates and that kind of thing, but it's hard to tell right now.
Do you ever drive down the street and you see a guy in a water truck, and the plastic cup, the big giant vat of water is strapped into the car, right? And the water is jumping all around in there? Mm-hmm. That's a football helmet with your brain in the middle.
It is.
Right? I mean, that's what's happening to your brain while you're running down the street getting hit. Every time I see that, I think, oh, my goodness, that's it. And then I'll leave you with this. Mike Matheny told me his career ended because of a concussion.
Absolutely.
He was a catcher.
He was.
And
a good one.
A good one, right. But, I mean, he was a catcher. So he had a concussion, and it ended his career. And he told me that it was months and months and years later that he would still leave the house, and he would call back to his wife and say, why did I leave the house again? He was still suffering the effects of this concussion years later. So, I mean, this is a real deal, and I still don't think people understand it and or want to even deal with the consequences.
I think that's the main take-home point is, I think we need to really get past the denial phase that this exists, and we can't just typecast it, as you nicely just put, into football, because it can happen in anything. It can happen from repetitive automobile accidents and other things too. So I think this is a real deal. The brain is precious, and we need to take care of it and look out for it. And more work to come on this.
Cardiologist with SLU Care and SSM Health, St. Louis University Hospital, Dr. Michael Lim. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks, guys.
8:29.